And we are live. Hi, Kasia, how are you?
Hi, Vincent. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm fine. So, first of all, where are you? Just to let the people understand geographically where to collocate you now.
So I'm a Belarusian political analyst, and I'm currently based in Minsk. That's in Belarus. Maybe for the Russian and Belarusian audience, that's quite obvious. But sometimes, like when you're traveling somewhere in the U.S., the Americans would ask, like, what kind of state, like in what state this Minsk is located or Belarus is located. So yeah. I'm in Minsk, Belarus, and I focus my research on Belarusian foreign policy, regional security, and the so-called great power rivalry between West China and Russia. And I'm very much interested in what it means for the rest of the world, including our region.
Yeah, so you, as you were remembering a bit of off the records now about our past time, so we met in 2011 in Moscow, doing an experience at Higher School of Economics, and then you left for the US. Am I right?
Yeah, so I did my master's degree in Syracuse, that's upstate New York, and I studied international relations. And before that, I have my undergrad in law. And then I worked for 2 years at the American Bar Association doing international development, democratic governance projects with UN agencies. And now I'm back to Belarus working on foreign policy stuff.
Yeah. So, yeah, we had the podcast several weeks ago, but for technical issue, we couldn't finalize and post, unfortunately. So, and we were discussing about the status of international relations, and it was November, I think, or December, so we couldn't expect
1 hour conversation on IR and like China and stuff like that, and then unfortunately it was lost.
Yeah, it was also related to some amendment of agreement between your country and Russia and so on. So we couldn't expect what was going on in China. Yeah, we mentioned China, but was not related with the current situation. So I would like to ask you, can you provide our listener, our follower, with your snapshot about the international relations situation before the COVID-19?
I like to put things in a perspective of this concept of great power rivalry between the major players such as US, China, and Russia, and analyze it in the frame of the international liberal rules-based order. And what it means for the rest of the world, for smaller actors like Belarus, because essentially when we see how, let's say, US and China compete for global dominance, for shaping the rules at the international institutions or in trade or in competing even for providing aid or infrastructure projects, then this has consequences and consequences for smaller actors. And so essentially, there is a bunch of literature and discussions in virtually like every think tank in the world. We're living in the end of the liberal internationalism era. Are we seeing the sort of the shift to the east, which means like to the future Chinese dominance, and the China could be the next global leader instead of US, and essentially what rules this future leader would bring instead of the sort of international multilateralism and democratic values and rule of law. Are those things at threat when we see the rise of China and the efforts of Russia and China to sort of unite, to rebalance to get a more say at the international table and to sort of change the status quo. So I would say that when I look at the current or like the pre-COVID puzzle of world politics, I was looking at through this frame because I think it's very helpful. Again, even when we look at smaller actors like Belarus, like what's going on there, what are the prospects for regional security and stuff like that.
Yeah, my point of view, you can agree or not, and I would like to know. I think that all the international relations scenario changed in Munich in 2007 because was said out loud, no, by the Russian president at the time that. So I think that we should end this age, this era of one policeman judging everybody and cleaning up the world only from their perspective. So maybe we have to wake up, or we risk the collapse of the multilateralism, or the multilateral international politics. I think that partially have to agree because the system was already showing that some cleavage, some fracture, no, in within. Also because the European Union lost that central role of let me say to bring the equilibrium, no, to the balance that we had before. Why? Because we had, as you mentioned, new big actors moving. I do not refer only to China, because China itself couldn't be that powerful without creating around the country, around his view, his policy, certain small countries, no, certain like medium or small powers, or even a new, let me say, I will not call friendship, because I do not believe in the international politics in friendship, but I believe more in some opportunism and need. But a new relationship with India and other countries, no, as we saw. So I can my snapshot of the pre-COVID international relations situation begins in 2007. So in Munich, when Vladimir Putin declared that we have to change, or something will go wrong. So I have to agree. I would like to ask you: do you agree or no on this?
I mean, this statement.
I mean, in temporal. I mean, in terms of timing, not on.
Yeah, like I was just going to say about this Munich speech by Vladimir Putin back then. It was quite a significant statement on behalf of Russian leadership, that Russia is not content at all with the status quo and with the existing rules. And then when we look forward, what happened the next year in Georgia, and then a few years later in Ukraine, that was a good sign that Russia was sort of starting to behave very aggressively in the region, and then overthrowing the existing rules and ignoring the norms of like international order.
Yeah. On that, I have my point of view. As you remember, we didn't discuss a lot, but I see, because my mentor gave me this opportunity. No, the mentor that you met, Professor Kaciaryna. We try to see the international relations from one point of view, the point of view of international aid. No,
yeah.
So and after the second term of the Vladimir Putin presidency, we saw that Russia decided to come back as an international aid actor. I mean, I'm not talking about international aid in terms of humanitarian aid, no? So like when we send food or medicine, but the aid is a more complex, let me say, phenomenon and structure. So, and also I think that this point of view. So Russia wanted to come back in the international arena as a new actor. So taking out the costume of Soviet Union, let me say, the mask of Soviet Union, because of course the transition was quite accomplished for a certain characteristic and factors, and become like take the costume of Russian Federation, so a new status with a new status and a new country. And of course, this is the first parameter. And the second parameter is that the enlargement of NATO. Because I think that we have to read also this, because when the Soviet Union collapsed, and there are records of this, we have defined on the books, or even from, let me say, NATO-friendly review, that there was an agreement that the NATO could not enlarge over a certain border in the Central East Europe. And I think that, of course, I'm against the violence, I'm against the tough action, but I see that Russia had to give a sign, that come on, we are not in 1988 the nearly default country, so we are back. I mean, this is my point of view. So the Russian bear is depicted in certain literature. I mean, was not, let me say, sleeping. So wake again and show the teeth and something more.
I would say, like, if the Russian bear was a nice and friendly one, then the Baltic states, for instance, wouldn't be so eager to run away and to protect themselves with NATO and to try to expand this NATO umbrella, like in security architecture, upon them. Well, there is a good few decades of history of Russian and /Soviet and /Russian Empire aggressive actions in the region, including Belarus, and then again Baltic states, and all the Stalin repressions and all the horrible stuff that was done through pursuing foreign policy goals. So again, like, if Russia was such a nice actor, no one would try maybe to run away from it. And then I would bring up, let's say, China and the assertiveness China is trying to impose on the neighbors, including some economic coercion and some manipulations with trade and diplomatic stuff to achieve the foreign policy goals. So, and then again, I'm not idealizing any state or saying that there are sort of like angels in Washington on the hill, sort of spreading democracy and rule of law and being driven by purely altruistic motives. I mean, when we talk about politics, it's very pragmatic stuff, and foreign policy is very pragmatic in its nature. But I would say there is a difference between what the, let's say, US or EU do in terms of keeping or attracting neighbor states in its orbit through, let's say, aid through the, like when it comes to EU, then it's the Eastern Partnership Program, and that's something that countries willingly subscribe to, and they they provide sort of a win-win framework for the participants, with certain flaws and like exclusions for sure. But in general, let's say NATO membership, no one is forcing a country to sign up for NATO in first place or to stay in NATO. And then when we talk about non-democratic, autocratic leaders in Beijing and Moscow, they use a different set of tools to achieve their foreign policy goals. Maybe because they don't feel safe enough, or they don't feel that they have a solid say at the international arena at the moment, because they want to get like more stakes at the world politics, at the world arena, and therefore they try to achieve those goals by using more aggressive techniques, therefore intimidating their neighbors. And that's why I argue that those rising powers, those rivals, are dangerous, because they pursue their goals through very non-democratic and some coercive techniques.
But okay, as this is my theory, that these are the sign of the hand of multilateralism, that I think that we can discuss in more in detail later. I would like to know your point of view. I have my point of view. I have my theory that I'm developing, that China far from his border is using not the hard power, no, but using a form of soft power that I define checkbook diplomacy. What is going on in Africa? We discussed in that unpublished podcast. If you remember, we discussed some of the things that were happening in your country. I define this checkbook diplomacy, but I would like to make a step back and ask your opinion. What turn on the Chinese spirit to come as a big, great actor in the international arena?
You mean like what led to China's rise, or?
Yeah, I mean, apart the growing, in terms of economic things, but as a great actor to decide that when China decided to dominate the international relations arena and to become the counterpart of United States.
I would say like when China expanded its economic might and military might, political might, and then they realized that they have the ability to project their power outwards, not only develop internally. So yeah, I guess like that's what leads or motivates the country to get a greater say on international arena. And I would say like same thing with.
Yeah, no. My question was more, let me say, precise, because this is our common view. But as you mentioned before, Russia rise again with events in Georgia and so on. There is any events that provoked China from your point of view?
I'm not a historian, I'm not a super expert in China, so I won't throw specific dates, but I would say like that's tied to those internal, like the economic and political rise domestically.
Living in the US, how you saw the new predominance of China in the international arena? How were read internally in the country? Because I see that the decision of Trump, to decide to stop this commercial relationship with China there is a logic behind this, no? So every year the U.S. has a huge minus in the trade balance, in the checkbook balance, and of course Trump say, okay, why, following his rhetoric, why we should feed our enemy if we can develop old relationship or find a new partners, even in terms of trade. But I was seeing this rhetoric and this move from within the US.
I can maybe talk from the U.S. think tank's perspective and the U.S. foreign policy experts who sort of move forward and try to forecast the scope of China rise, and they obviously see that the number one competitor and someone who challenges the U.S. current superpower sort of status is obviously China, and therefore they spend enormous amounts of efforts and money to project when and how China would grow, what's going on with Chinese economy, what are the Chinese interests globally in every region, and then there's a bunch of word game projections for the Pentagon when they try to project, is there any military conflict possible, how, like in what area, and then be somewhere over a small island in South China Sea or over Taiwan, how the U.S. would respond, or would China try to provoke a conflict with U.S. allies in Pacific region, and then what the U.S. possible response to it would be. So yeah, I would say that's the major point of focus by U.S. analysts, and for good reason. similar to, let's say, what was going on with Moscow and Washington during the Cold War. And at that times, I guess during the Nixon administration times, when the U.S. decided to expand, to recognize China instead of, the People's Republic of China instead of Taiwan, and for political reasons, again, to sort of rebalance, to invest more in ties with China, to rebalance against the USSR at that times. And then you brought up Trump actions on trade. I just want to bring, I won't talk about whether trade war is the best tool to rebalance Chinese influence. But
is a choice? What is a choice? I mean, they had a bunch of choices, and
bring up another thing that I was very disappointed with and worried, let's say, because it has consequences, I guess, for the world order, not only for the U.S. It was Trump's decision to withdraw from Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, TPP. And then again, why it matters, not only for U.S. That was a good example of how foreign policy comes into play with economic rationale. And when Obama created this inspired this deal, he said that we should write establish the trade rules before, to establish those rules and to create an international trade agreement before China would do so. And then again, there was not so much economic gains for U.S. participation in the deal, but then there was a good economic tool to rebalance economic ties or economic dependence on China, between its neighbors and China. So I guess that was not the wisest move on behalf of the Trump administration. And then I don't think that the direct aggressive rhetoric from Washington to Beijing is the best tool, is the best way of doing things, because Beijing leadership is using, as you said, more of covert or more soft diplomatic tools versus throwing any open, threats or accusations towards Washington. They do this in a more sophisticated and covert way, and I don't think that the current U.S. administration is doing its best to address those challenges.
The confusion was seen with the reshuffle of several positions in the State Department, in the other departments. So it was quite evident even to not expert that something was going on, within the Trump administration, because we saw even several public statements, where the Trump's team was telling we disagree, and I think that. But even now, in the situation when Moscow sent some aid, medical aid to Washington, they said that Trump say, "Oh, thank you," and the State Department was quite embarrassed of that, because wasn't expecting such move from Moscow.
On that, because from what I saw in the news and then in some analysis, that Russia was trying to sort of twist this, saying that they sent actual aid to U.S., but then the State Department issued the statement that U.S. bought this, that they purchased those.
Yeah, I can say, because I'm working on that, and I discussed with a colleague in Moscow and in the U.S. So that move from the State Department was to cover, because in some month we have so in the US they have elections, and they couldn't show the weak point, the weak side of this. So the State Department, of course, has to cover a bit the story, but Russia sent that as a hate, and then they agreed to make a different move, but ex post, later on. Yeah, if you want to comment.
There is a bunch of questions about Russia sending aid to European countries and the US and trying to sort of capitalize on it. And then there are some evidence that either in some cases that this aid was not the proper kind of materials that the recipient was expecting, or that the Russian propaganda would try to capitalize on it and try to twist facts, saying something like Italians are...
I can comment in Italy.
Like that. Yeah, sure.
I can comment on Italy because is what I can see even from Moscow, because I could discuss with friends, colleagues, people that welcomed Russian, so people that have in the army, and they saw. Of course, there is a part of the Italian, let me say, civil society that is following a big mainstream rhetoric about this. So the reason of sending the aid from Russia is, let me say, twofold. Okay, the first one because historically Italy was a friend of Russia. Mm-hmm. Since the 20s of the past century, Soviet Union and Italy, they had a very strong tie. Even during the second, after the Second World War, so Italy has the biggest communist party in Europe. So we had very good and strong ties. So this is a sign to say thank you to Italy that never threw away Russia. Even during the sanction time, Italy always fought to preserve a bit the Russian interest in Europe. So this was, let me say, a medal to Italy. Say thank you. No, the Russian Soviet way to do. No, we give you a medal. No, a certificate. As in Russian, it's like gramota. No, so the a certificate of achievement or acknowledgement. Thank you, Italy. The second, I think, is more technical and scientific. Let me say, where were sent army like doctors, biologists, and so on, in a specific region of Italy, in the specific province of Italy, where the outbreak of pandemic was not understandable in scientific way. So we know that Russia has very good military sector on biologists and medical. It's like one of the best sector that they had in the Russian administration and even scientific board. And I think that they sent scientists there to study the virus. I mean, of course they help because the Russians army and did something that Italian army, Italian service didn't do or didn't want to do. So they did a good service from my point of view, and also from the point of view of people that was living in that province. But the scientific, so the second view on this is that they wanted to study the virus. Why? Because they had in Moscow we had an advantage of 2-3 weeks against the virus. So the outbreak just came. So they want to understand if it was a genetic modification of the virus to be prepared. So this is the point of view from several of us, okay? European, even some American colleagues like that, not Russian, I mean, because of course Russian could defend their position. Let me say, the analysis of this fact, that this aid is twofold. So the first one, to thank an historical friend. The second one is to understand what is going on in one of the most eaten country in this pandemic.
Actually, I have a question. Like, I started thinking about China and Chinese presence and collaboration in collaboration projects in Italy. So what do you think about Chinese interests towards Italy in general, and maybe during the crisis, during the COVID pandemic?
Now we saw that all the countries are interested to put, I don't want to use this term, but let me say, to let the people understand, a Trojan horse within the European Union, because it's quite weaker now than a couple of months ago. It was already weak, the European Union, but now it's, of course, weaker. And if you see, we saw three great actors acting in the European Union: Russia, US with the memorandum that signed with Italy about the aid, and China. And we saw also middle, small actors. So now the European Union is the land of everybody, let me say, of nobody, of everybody, if we can read in this way. China, of course, moved toward Italy with a memorandum that say everything and nothing, regarding some technical partnership, this 5G and other thing. But I read this memorandum and was really telling, was empty, an empty box, just to begin with. Of course, China is interested in Italy because they had a very huge diaspora. One of the city in Tuscany, in Italy, Prato, is nowadays completely Chinese. So Italians left. I had a couple of friends that they teach at Italian state school, and they have classes only with Chinese people. So just to let you understand the measure and the situation. And of course, Italy has, as we define, some diamond in our treasury, because we have a very interesting and prospective firm. If you think about Eni in the oil and gas, but also think Kaciaryna with the production of in the defensive sector, or in the ships, or even other. Let me say about the fashion, or other. So that now during this crisis they can become cheaper and more applicable for the Chinese market. This is my point of view. Everybody now has interest in the European Union and in those countries that are more affected by this crisis.
Yeah.
Not only China, even US, because this memorandum came as a tough response to the other countries.
Yeah, it's just like I brought up China because when I'm thinking about the Belt and Road Initiative, and then again the potential political foreign policy goals that could be contained in this huge project, and then when China offers assistance in constructing, let's say, a port somewhere or some other objects, then there
is part of my theory of the checkbook diplomacy. I focused on Africa, and now I had a very interesting experience in Uzbekistan. I visited Uzbekistan for academic and scientific reason, but then some member of the parliament asked my support as an analyst and as a consultant to discuss several matters. And when I visited Samarkand, I was brought to one square that seemed like Beijing or, I don't know, Shanghai. I say, what is going on here? I say, Chinese supported our project to build a new building for our university, but they put a condition. They wanted that with the rest of the money, we build a fully Chinese square with Confucius, with, I don't know, very beautiful monuments and so on. And I say, okay. So, but this is also like a form of soft power. I mean, we don't put a tag. This building was sponsored by the China, no, but we put a square, more evidence than and more cultural than a tag. So the Belt Road, yes, I think that is something that will arrive through certain European Union country. I think that as we discussed, also your country is in the middle of these things, because China is building a twofold Belt Road, one passing from the old way, no, and another that in case of emergency will pass through Africa. That's why there is this interest, and I think that the original road will not make completely happy Russia, because Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and all these countries historically were under the umbrella of the Russian Federation, and I see that I saw in Uzbekistan, for example, that people is more propense to be pro-China than Russia on certain discussions. So, and they were open to tell me this, despite I was coming from Moscow, because I'm an Italian guy. No, this also this cultural business card helped me to see with a new pair of glasses the situation.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts following up on what we just said. Like, I guess one more hidden or unobvious consequence of a country's involvement into BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, is that a recipient country, when it's deeply involved into those contracts, ties with China, then the country is less likely to criticize China internationally. And there were cases when, for instance, Greece did not support the joint EU position at the UN when there was a joint declaration, joint statement that was criticizing Chinese violations of human rights, for example. So there is one more thing about that. And then it just came to my mind about Italy, COVID, and China. That Huawei Italy is offering some tax solutions to Italian hospitals, offering aid to set up some cloud some like smart health solutions and some technical aids to Italian hospitals. Which is a very nice gesture, of course, but then it kind of raises concerns how or whether it would give access to a Chinese company for sensitive infrastructure, and whether it would potentially undermine some sensitive data. So I was wondering whether you shared those concerns, and what's your take on that?
To recall my previous words, now there is a rush towards the recipient. So this is the thing. So everybody is running to look for a recipient. Yeah. The best recipient is the biggest and the weakest. So this is the thing. And now, if you think that I saw a statement from just to let you understand how it works, the aid dynamic and system. I saw a statement that an historical partner of Russia, Serbia, was complaining that didn't receive enough from Moscow in terms of aid against this, and that Russia went to help Italy, that is in the European Union, sanction and so on. So just to let you understand, now the Russia is not the recipient that's interest to receive the aid. It's more the donor, and the donors, the community of donors, more interest to find the best recipient. This is the key. That's why China is offering more specific products, let me say, in terms of aid, because the aid is a product, okay, that you you pack and you send, you deliver, and you use. It's not the potato, the medicaments that we send to, I don't know, in Bosnia or the former Yugoslavia countries during the war, or in Africa, in Somalia, Ethiopia, and so on, during the revolution. Now, help are more sophisticated products. So China, of course, is trying to offer something that US couldn't, that European Union that is completely blocked cannot offer to Italy, and even Russia. No? So Russia offer what? Money? No. Technical help. Okay, I come, I give you my best people, we help, it's useful, you say me thank you, we go home. No? US, you see, came back with a bureaucratical technical issue. Let's sign a memorandum, money, maybe we will help, we will finance. So China, yes, we have the money, but apart the money, we can offer something more for the instant help for now. And technology is, of course, what China has.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that there is a lack of U.S. leadership globally, or U.S. willingness to clearly somehow help those countries suffering from COVID, and then China is sort of having a more proactive position towards other countries than the U.S. I was just wondering, in general, do you share these concerns about China offering aid or any sort of collaboration, technical projects, infrastructure at all? In particular,
I'm always concerned when we talk about China, because he's a big player. I'm not that player that come buy the things and say thank you. No, it's come, bring the money, and want to control it. So, and I'm afraid that the political leadership that now we have in Italy is not aware of what is really China, and especially in the Minister of Foreign Affairs, I think they are a bit confused, and also they are confused because they are trying to find a balance with the other powers. No, so accepting from China and from Russia, but telling also yes to US to don't offend them and create a problem. I'm afraid of China. I mean, not only during this crisis, but I was afraid before. But not because I see them as a devil. Don't misunderstand me. I don't want that who is watching us and listening as misunderstanding. But I'm afraid more because we could lose that that diamond that I was telling that are life for the Italian economy. I mean, I'm afraid that the needs of money, the need of fresh air, oxygen could lead to not right move. But as I'm afraid in Africa, I mean, it's the same thing. I was talking to a couple of Ethiopian colleagues, and they say like, hey man, we are tired of them. I mean, they control everything. So they came here with the money, with the bags, with the infrastructure, but now, I mean, that's it. We are tired. So, I mean, China is not Russia. China is not Soviet Union. The rhetoric, the Soviet Union come with tanks, but then the tanks leave. Okay, so came the time the tanks left certain countries. The rhetoric that China come with money, and accept the money is very easy. Withdraw some kind of help, any kind of aid is very difficult. It's like sanction. Apply a sanction is very easy. Withdraw the sanction decision is very difficult.
Yeah, but I'm wondering whether a recipient state that is looking for, let's say, lending for infrastructure projects or some other purposes whether they could actually, in some cases, be a winner in this sort of competition of donors or those lending options that are available out there. Let's say when a country like Belarus would consider an offer from World Bank or from BRI or from some Eurasian-led infrastructure bank or stuff like that, and whether when there's like a few options available out there, whether they could consider and accept the option that is most acceptable for them. Because let's say when China, as a response to China BRI initiative, the EU launched its projects in Eurasia with the European Investment Bank and the European Connectivity Initiative. So maybe in the end, those smaller states can even be a sort of a winner of this sort of competition. If
Depends.
Right?
From my point of view, depends on the timing that the aid is coming, the condition, and let me say, what you're going to sign in terms of written and unwritten contracts with the donors. And of course, who is the recipient? Because if you are the UK, for example, no? Or if you are the France, if you are Germany, you can read the situation in one way. But if you are, let me say, Albania, if you are, I don't know, Cyprus, is another thing. But to move from what is going on that we a bit described and read, and I really appreciated your question because gave me the possibility to put into words like flying words what I'm trying to write in these days and what I'm writing in these days. They sometimes can't be read properly, no, by let me say not expert of foreign policy and for analysis. What is your point of view? What's next? So my question was, is it the end of a multilateral world? So how do you see the future? After that, this puzzle, COVID puzzle will be set in place.
I would say that the COVID crisis just underlined the existing problems and the sort of the status quo and the situation in the world politics. And it just emphasized the scope of conflict and the rivalry between U.S. on one hand and U.S. and China and Russia on the other. And then it underlines the scope of problems, let's say, with Belarusian economy when we're not able to, or like we're having troubles with introducing a full-scale quarantine or to have some emergency funds that the Belarusian government could allocate to Belarusian citizens, and that it just another illustration that our economy is vulnerable, and hence, like I'm just talking about Belarus as an example of, let's say, it's like a smaller actor, and then I guess in the future this would again underline the existing problems in the foreign policy. Let's say for Belarus, when we would deal with the consequences of the pandemic crisis, our economy would be vulnerable. We will seek some external possible lending, financial offers to stabilize our economy, and then we would seek some aid from, again, greater actors from, or possibly from IMF, etc. So this just exaggerates or underlines the scope of existing problems and the status quo we have before the COVID.
My view is that the COVID let the change be fast. So I mean, transform the situation in slow and acute but slow, because we saw that something was changing in not in with the old dynamic and the old pattern, but the COVID accelerated the process. I think so. Gave that push to accelerate the process, and I think that I will not be surprised if yes, the structure of the European Union would be still existing for I don't know 5, 7, even 10 years, but the content and the model and the philosophy of the European Union will be dead in a couple of years.
So you're not I think that you optimist, huh?
In terms of, I'm not optimist in terms of the European Union. I'm quite convinced that the European Union was a good project. I mean, a united Europe was what we need. And we still need. But the problem is how to convince people, in the citizens in the countries, because we see this movement against the European Union. Right or wrong, I don't want to give. I don't want to enter this rhetoric of values, because it's. I mean, I try to be quite independent from this discussion and arguments, but I do not see that the leadership, if there is one in Europe, wants to survive, or want to eject to suicide, because I don't see a prompt response to certain crises, and COVID-19 is the last. Because certain a European Council or the Eurogroup meeting on 23rd, 27th of April, when people is dying now, or film stop to operate, to be operative now. I mean, come on, we are all experts, in our fields. We know what to do, and then we complain when external actors come with a bag to help us. I mean, it's a bit like the usual strange European rhetoric, certain European rhetoric, not with a particular view. So I'm not optimistic. I believe that the puzzle of COVID-19 accelerated the process of dissolution of certain multilateral organization or integration models. I do not believe that we will see only a two blocks, let me say, world as in the Cold War. I will see actors, small and middle actors, moving as, let me say, crazy flies, where, or let me say, crazy bees, where the honey will be tasted.
For sure. Yeah.
We will not have the two blocks of the first blocks as it was now, like with the not alienated countries. We will have several actors, big actors, and around them small, medium actors that they will move opportunistically when they will need. This is my point of view. But everything will be based on a bilateral dynamic, bilateral agreement, bilateral talks, and so on. What we had before, even the G20, even we see like with the OPEC plus framework, we see that it works and doesn't work nowadays. Because when you see that the risk is behind the door, you forget about the balance. You forget about the equilibrium. You think only about yourself.
What's your take on transatlantic relationships and like the future of Atlanticism? Is there one, or what do you think?
As you had the opportunity to see, we had this drill in Europe, and
it's postponed, is it?
Was effective, but only with American troops. So Italy didn't send the troops. Say, guys, we are not in the condition. But because you can have even a civil war, inside the country, you send the troops, but we need the troops within our country to help our people. But even Germany, you saw, it reduced only to 30% of the planned troops. I think that even the framework and the model of Atlantic agreement, transatlantic organization is not the card that even the US can play. I think that even the US now will play the bilateral card. So we'll come to Italy and we'll say Italy. So we develop our relationship this way. But even because the Brexit signed the hand of that model. Because how now to cooperate in the North Atlantic organization with one of the most powerful in terms of military, defensive system country outside the European Union. So this is also nobody thought about this. When the Brexit occurred, when the UK left the European Union, several analysts say, "Oh, cool! Now we will come back to discuss and to open a dialogue with Russia." Are you serious? I mean, are you serious to move this analysis in this way? There are other factors that are influencing. Do you think that the UK and the US will leave you to discuss openly about certain things with Russia like that? With still thousands of troops and bases in your countries. But on the other side, the analysis now would be, my analysis is different. I do not try to forecast. As I said to my students, I'm not Nostradamus or David Copperfield that can take out from the hat any game, any toys, but I try to analyze. I use this Weberian instrument that is called the ideal type and try to analyze the situation every time in different way, in different framework. And I see that even the North Atlantic agreement and organization is going to collapse silently. I mean, we will not see the same things with that occurred with the UK, no? Bye, we were friends, and now we are, maybe we will be partners, no? No, I would say that everything silently will dissolve.
But what if there is a new president other than Trump at the upcoming elections? Would it change something? Like,
do you think
restore the ties with the traditional allies?
Do you think that in the US there is that huge difference now between Republicans and them? I mean, the move of as a friend of mine from the UK said that the little Bernie, so to withdraw from the campaign and support Biden. So we should even remember who is Biden, who was Biden. I mean, he's not a guy that came with the flag of Red Cross, or other with a white flag and say like, let's be friends and make peace with everybody. So we even, I mean, Trump is more evident. Okay, Trump is the guy that go on TV and say something without filter. Because he can't. This is the personage. This is the actor that was, I think, was born like that. Nobody created. I mean, this is the man, no? But Biden is like, yes, with a good costume every time, like dry, and few times he says something not on place, not out of out of the pot. But still, Biden, I don't think is the that peaceful guy that we expect. As even the relationship with the analysis, the wrong analysis that everybody said with the Clinton, no. But I think in Moscow we discussed this. We were expecting to have for Russia better off was better Clinton as a president than Trump, because Trump is a new actor, unexpected, created a lot of trouble around the world, as we saw, because he's a unstable actor. And to analyze the Clinton was clear, because we had already the experience as State Department, Chief of State Department, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and then, of course, we knew how to read as a president.
Yeah, but like when I'm thinking about the traditional alliances, like between US and let's say EU, which is NATO, or some other alliances US has in the Pacific, I guess it's in the US interest to keep those. I mean, because there is a bunch of different calculations whether the US is overstretching its promises to allies on security side and whether they should just withdraw. But I'm wondering, okay, like, if you calculate just how much money you're throwing into NATO and how much it costs you in the like in terms of like pure mathematics, then probably it could look like a very like troublesome obligation. But when you look at the potential gains you could get out of it, then I guess it's worth preserving it. Like for instance, when we like there is a calculation that the costs of maintaining NATO, like U.S. troops in Germany, like of stationing those troops, is the same amount of expenses that the U.S. would spend if they were stationed domestically. But at the same time, it gives some strategic advantage for U.S. to launch some military operations in the Middle East or stuff like that. And then the U.S., EU sort of, I wanted to say solidarity, but let's say like the Article 5 of NATO, like the Article 5 of NATO, what's the NATO agreement? Sort of it protects the Baltic states or gives them some sense of security against potential Russian threat. And I was wondering like whether there is a benefit, and I believe there is, for both Europe and US to stay united in the face of some other external threats, such as potential Russia's aggression or Chinese rise. And maybe the leaders don't see those benefits in the short perspective when they just calculate the math or get stuck in some short-term quarrels or disagreements. But strategically, I mean, it's a good idea to stay united with those old allies, despite some small or short-sighted misunderstandings.
I would like to close, and I would like also to invite to a further discussion with maybe another guest to create also another point of view in the next week if you would like to be involved. But I would like to close this wonderful lecture of foreign policy. So because from a conversation I think it became a lecture of double lecture of foreign policy, because despite we are friends, I would like to talk very calmly and friendly. I like when I have in front of me somebody that has a point of view different than mine. I really like. I do not like to see, as sometimes happen with my students, like you are right, you're right, you're right. No, I'm not right. I'm just telling my point of view. Then it's up to you to decide if I'm right or wrong, or if you're right or wrong. But I would like to just to snapshots to analyze. First of all, I would like to close the thought about Biden. If Biden will be the new guest of the White House, I think that he will continue this crusade against China, but moving underground. Okay, we'll move underground and not on Twitter. Okay, because as we will discuss on Monday with a colleague of mine about diplomacy, digital diplomacy, neuro diplomacy, the problem now that we move from classic model of diplomacy to the digital diplomacy, and this is a drama, according to my point of view. So Biden will move from, let me say, the Twitter 140, 160 characters diplomacy to the underground crusade against China. This to close the previous point. About the Baltics, my point of view...
On that,
sorry?
Can I just comment on that, on Biden?
Yeah.
I'm a little bit biased about him because he's an alum of the same school where I went to, Syracuse, and I'm kind of, I don't know, like hoping that maybe he would win instead of his competitor. And then, I agree that he would use more covert or maybe diplomatic or polite ways even of doing things and continuing this rivalry with China. And I do not expect, I'm interested in this US-China dynamics to the extent it affects, again, Belarus and our region. And one of the signs of this US-Chinese clash and intersection of interests was in Belarus when Pompeo visited Minsk in February, and he explicitly stated that the U.S. would invest or support the Belarusian IT sector and the high-tech park, and then which sounds like a very nice, wonderful statement, but I would see some political rationale behind it, because if the U.S. does not extend this interest and support into Belarusian IT sector, then the China would do so. And then again...
We discussed, if you remember, these things, if you remember, on that offline podcast, no? We discussed these things. Yeah.
In this, why things matter, even for smaller states, what's going on in the bigger picture.
Yeah. And recalling the point about Baltics, my point of view is that Baltics use these Russophobic fears to increase their added value. Because without this rhetoric that Russia will invade us, I do not think that Russia is the interest. Is already overstretched Russia, okay? Overstretched with a few people to fill this box. One thing is the influence, one thing is to overstretch. But the Baltics use that we have the fears that Russia will overstretch again as the previous what's happened in the previous century. I do not think this, and I can read even in these days, in the last years, let me say this. But Baltics use these rhetorics to increase their value, to increase their value as a recipient. Okay, because what's the value of Baltics nowadays? In terms of strategic, if not to be a tower to look inside Russia, no, or to be a content to put a few NATO troops on the Russian border, but to increase their value and to ask something more, they have to use this rhetoric, because if they say, no, Russian forgot about us, everything is fine, okay, we go away, we do not support certain sector that you need and so on. I mean, I do not think this is my point of view, and I invite anybody else that think the opposite to discuss with arguments. Where see the risk of Russia overstretching, invading the Baltics, and I really do not like this rhetoric that Russia use some form of propaganda and so on. But if we think that in this country lives still a Russian diaspora, no, of course Russia should use some instrument to protect, at least ideally, his people, as China is doing, or as the US is doing. No, all the countries are trying to do it. All great actors, not all the countries, all great actors try to do that. But I think that, tell me.
For the next conversation, what's going on in Baltic states, Belarus, Ukraine, and the intersection?
Yeah, of course. The post-Soviet. I would like to discuss with you what is going on in the post-Soviet world, even with the precious experience that I have in some of the post-Soviet republic on the other side, not on the European side, but on the Asian side. Yes, of course, I would like to discuss with you and with other colleagues. Even if you have any suggestion, I would like to invite in this format other people. Kasia, I would like to thank you, because it's always a pleasure to discuss about foreign policy with you, and the time fly, because it's 1 hour, officially 1 hour 12-15 minutes that we are discussing, and we didn't look at the watch to see. And but I from my vision is was interesting because we tried to touch several topics, but in somehow connected with the.
And we didn't fight much over different views.
Sorry.
Like I was saying, we didn't fight much over.
No, come on! But we are both of us. We are diplomats. How to fight? I mean, we are not from the school of Trump. I mean, we have a different school, no? So you have the Biden school. I have I don't know the Italian school. Or even the British school that I love more. So in this term. Okay, I would like to thank you, and I'd like to remind you, our Italian-speaking follower and listener, that tomorrow we have a very interesting live streaming podcast with Andrea Tundo, an Italian journalist of the Il Fatto Quotidiano. We will talk with him at 2:00 Italian time, 3:00 Moscow time. It will be interesting. We will understand what's going on in the journalism nowadays, and also how they are trying to cope with misinformation, fake news on the time of COVID, because this is also a huge issue with journalism and news and mainstream and so on. So see you tomorrow for an Italian appointment, and Kasia, thank you so much again.
Thank you.